Right, I think we'll get cracking. So hello and welcome to the second of the Lunch and Learn workshops. This session will be going through brand. My name's Emma and I work within the marketing and events team at Nexus for the University of Leeds. The Nexus team will be running more virtual events coming up in the next few weeks. So if you're interested, do keep an eye out on our website on nexusleeds.co.uk/events. Similarly, if you'd like to find out how you can connect with the university, do sign up to our mailing list via the website. So today's event, the session will be roughly an hour, and at the end we'll have time for questions. You will all be on mute, but if you do have any questions as we go along, do just drop some questions into the question box on your dashboard. Myself, Nick and Rachel will monitor that to make sure that we can answer any questions throughout the session. So I'll now pass over to our hosts, Nick and Rachel from Leeds-based creative and brand agency Thompson, who we've worked with at Nexus since our inception. Nick and Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Lovely, yes, thanks for that. Good intro. So my name's Rachel Cook. I'm client partner and co-owner of Thompson Brand Partners. We're a branding agency, like Emma says, and we'll tell you a bit more about what we do in a second. But we've been around quite a while, 35, 36 years. So we have been doing branding for all of that time, and I've worked on quite a range of clients, but particularly I started off my career at Thompson about a decade ago, working on things like the Olympics, Confused.com and other retail brands, but latterly I specialise more in health, mental health and health tech. And I'll be talking to you about a couple of specific examples in a second of brands that we've worked on. Nick?
Thanks very much. And I'm Nick Ramshaw. I'm the MD of the agency. I'm the one who's worked there for 35 years, unlike Rachel. What I'm going to talk to you more about is the theory side of branding, and it'll all become clear as we go through. This webinar originally started to be planned as a face-to-face meeting at the university, so we've had to adapt it for web use, and also we pitched it originally at the members at Nexus, and I think the audience today will probably be a little bit broader than that, so apologies to anyone if it's too simple in terms of branding theory, or apologies if it's too complicated, but we're trying to go for some middle ground, and we're trying to give you some of our experiences really to show you what we've learned along the way and to help to be quite useful. Now I'm going to start with an image of an advert, which is
coming.
Thanks.
Hang on a second. I'm just taking over control. One sec. So I think I am. Let me know when you can see it, Nick.
Not yet.
No? This worked a minute ago, I promise. Oh, there we go. Thank you for making me presenter. That's lovely. Nick, you might have to do it from your side. It's not catching up. Emma, can you make Nick the presenter, please? Beautiful.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, just make it present rather than us seeing all your crib notes. Cheater.
Yeah, this is a recent ad for Coke, which I chose for a couple of reasons really. Firstly, because it's got quite minimal branding, which is quite a fashionable thing at the moment. But more because there's quite a famous story around branding that if Coke lost all of their production facilities and all of their factories were burnt down, then their business could restart the next day and they could go along nice and smoothly. But if they lost the recipe, the secret recipe to their drink, they would be absolutely up the swanny. And the fact is that Coke has built a brand that people believe in and trust, and it goes way beyond the value of the assets of a business. And that's something I'm going to talk about as we go through this presentation. But it was just a good starting point. Now, brand's a big business. You know, things have changed over recent years. I've been in the business a long time, and I used to design what were called corporate identities about 10 years ago. And the word brand has really only come into prominence in the last, I'd say, sort of 15 years or so. And what's interesting is everybody's become more brand savvy. People understand the world of branding. They touch them all the time, and they understand the value that they give. That there's the connections you have with brands can be both emotional and rational. You buy some because you think, oh, well, I want that product or I want that service, and it's something that meets my needs. But at the same time, the other half of your brain kicks in with a very emotive feeling, saying, well, I want to buy that, and you can't really explain why. But that's where the idea of brand loyalty comes in. And you'll see here, there's numerous league tables of brands across the world, if you could read all the details on here. And they go up and down each year. There are consumer brands, there are B2B brands on here. And the world changes. You know, the brands like Amazon and Google have obviously come to the fore over recent years that didn't exist before, and they've moved very, very quickly. So it's big business. Now, people often ask the question initially, what is a brand? And I've just got 2 or 3 definitions of a brand and why they might be appropriate. Now, this first one is about a set of associations. So that's the touch points that you feel and see when you come into contact with a brand. And they could be very broad. They could be physical things in a shop, or they could be something which is you hold physically. They could be more of a feeling. They could be a service. Obviously, there's more digital services nowadays. But some people define brands as this set of associations. Others are a bit more specific around the physical attributes of a name and a symbol, a logo as such, that identifies the goods and services in that particular case, and also the need to be differentiated from others, which again I'll come on to as we go through the talk. The definition we use as an agency is really quite simple. We believe that your brand is your reputation, and it's something that you can positively manage yourselves, but also something which can be affected hugely by things that happen outside of your control. We use this phraseology that managing the way people think about and feel about you is really what your brand is. And if you do good branding, so if you organize yourself to proactively influence the way people feel about you, it can do some great things for you. It can help you deliver your message, and all of these things on the list. Probably the most important 2 for us in our experience are the 2 at the bottom. That it gives you the opportunity to differentiate, which is absolutely critical in all markets, no matter what you do. And the other big opportunity it provides is to motivate your teams. And people don't often think about brands as an internal thing, but in our experience, that's one of the biggest advantages of organizing your brands is the opportunity to motivate your team. A number of businesses that we've rebranded recently, you could see the sense of pride within an organization rise, and effectively it gives people a flag that they can stand behind, and that's a really important thing. And so don't just think about branding as an external thing, think about it as an internal thing as well. Now, it's really interesting why companies come to us for a rebrand. They don't always knock on the door and say, please, can we have a rebrand? They ask for other things. That often their website is the first port of call, that their website is out of date and they're seeing it and it's on all the time. So their customers and their potential customers can see it. And they think, oh, I need a new website because it doesn't quite portray me in the way that I'd like it to be. Also, it might be that something has become inconsistent, that they've added a brochure or they've added a uniform, they've added something over time, and their branding has become inconsistent and it's become out of date. This is often the case that people come and ask us, but the people who we get a lot more excited by are the people who are asking these questions, and they're saying, well, we've got a level of ambition and our brand doesn't reflect that, or our market has shifted and we need to reposition ourselves to make the most of the opportunity. We want to keep ahead of our competition. And also it's that the brand is not bringing us together as a team. So when people come to us with these sorts of challenges, these are the people who we know get the idea of branding a bit more than others. And in these cases, we're very usually operating at a boardroom level, that it's the owner of the business who is orchestrating the direction of the brand. And it's certainly the owners and the board level who have a greater influence on the direction it would go in. So often we have to be dealing with people at that very senior level in order to connect in a brand strategy with a business strategy. Now you'll see when you become involved with brands, lots and lots of phrases and terms that are used and lots of ideas. And there's a list here of just some of them. There are many more you can add to the list. And I'm just going to talk to you about the ones which have got a star against them. We're going to have a little bit of an interactive session around purpose. So you can start thinking about that now. And people organize these in different ways. You may have seen diagrams which sum up a brand strategy, and that might be in the shape of a temple with columns or an onion with lots of layers. These things are all trying in different ways to do the same thing. They're trying to summarize the strategy and the thinking that exists behind a brand that provides the platform. I'm going to talk more about this because that's the side of the business that I get more involved in. The creative side of things is when the design creative brings that strategy to life, and it does so in a way which engages with your customers. So that's the combination of the strategy and the creative that form that brand. Now that's only going so far. So as an agency, we can help to provide that platform. What's absolutely essential is the way in which that brand behaves going forward. So the things that it does, the ideas it has, the way it deals with its business. That's the critical side of things. It's relatively easy to set a purpose in life and say this is why we exist, but to live that purpose is the more difficult challenge, and I'll come on to that as we go through. So I'm just going to start with the first ingredient, really, which is a big idea. You know, everybody out there, I'm sure, has their own big idea with their own organisation, however they're organised within that organisation. But you need to have one. You need to think about these questions. What have you got that audiences will want? Why should people be interested in you and your services or your products and not somebody else? You know, what's the gap in the market that you can make the opportunity from? And if you think of just some examples of brands that I put together for today, someone like IKEA, which has been going for 80, 90 years now, they have a belief that good design should be for everyone. Simple as that. They actually started out as a mail order business in the 20s, or 1919, I think it was. And they've evolved over time into this furniture business and homeware business, although they're starting to get into other areas now. They're into building houses and doing lots of other things. I think they're even offering furniture on subscription, which will be an interesting concept. But their big idea is that good design should be available to everybody, at every price point as well. Really interesting. And that's the core of that. That's why people love it. They love meatballs as well and hot dogs, but that's the center of that particular brand. Someone like EasyJet came along in 1995 and started rewriting the rule book for airlines, where most airlines were owned nationally. They had inflexible ticketing arrangements, big luggage allowances, paid for meals, whatever time of the day you flew. EasyJet and Stelios, who just happened to get 7 million quid from his father as a startup funding package, he thought, well, there's a better way of doing this. And he actually wasn't the first in the market. What he did was he copied an American airline called Southwest Airlines, which more people will have heard of now than had heard of then. And he instigated a whole new system where you can fly for a much cheaper price, often cheaper than the bus sometimes. So that was his big idea. What he's then taken on is the concept of easy into hotels and car hire and lots of other areas. So his brand is based on a principle of making things easy, whether you like it or not. That's how they deal with life. Now, the second ingredient, and this is where the interactive bit comes in, is around purpose. And we've, in the world of branding, purpose has existed in different shapes and forms for a long time. And it's the very hardest thing to define. So if I asked you to think about your organization or your business and to write down what you do, you would find that relatively straightforward. It might be quite broad in terms of the opportunities, but you could write it down fairly easily. And if I then asked you to write down how you did it, again, it wouldn't be too much of a challenge because you know the processes that you go through and the assets that you use. But if I asked you to put down why you exist and the unique role that your brand plays in people's lives, so what is it about you that people would miss if you didn't exist? That's a really difficult question. And the world is changing its view of brands. It has been more cynical in the past than it is now, but people are starting to think about the brands that offer a bit more than just their products and services. And they're the brands which not only are doing well now, but will do well in the future. I'll set the interactive question now, just so you can be thinking about it. But what I want you to do is I want you to think and write down what your brand purpose is as an organization. So if you have your own business, what's your purpose? Secondly, if you work for a larger organization, what's the purpose of that organization? And I'd like you, if you've got some good things to say about that, to write it down in the form of a question in the question tab on the webinar. And at the end, if we've got time, we'll come back to some of those and just talk about those. Now, here's some examples which might help you with that. The first is an outdoor brand, which has been around for a long time. And this is an ad that they ran that people will know the brand Patagonia. And what they are absolutely committed to is the environment, and it's to do their bit to implement solutions. So the way that they do this is they might run an advertising campaign asking you not to buy one of their products because they think you ought to repair the one you've got because it's got a lifespan of 30 years and you've only had it for 5 years. So don't duplicate and purchase unnecessarily. They're another company that I think the first to close down on Black Friday in the States and say, well, you know, our purpose is to help you solve the environmental crisis, but get out there and enjoy the outdoors. So don't come into a shop on Black Friday to try and get a good deal. We're going to close ours and let our staff go out and enjoy what they should enjoy. So they're very much based on an environmental purpose. You'll know about Dove as well. That their campaign for real beauty has been going on for many years, and they believe that everybody, whatever shape, whatever age, whatever level of confidence they have, every woman should have the right to have a confident outlook on life. And that's going way beyond the concept of selling a bottle of moisturizer. That's giving people permission and confidence to be themselves in a world which tends to support sort of the better looking model, shall we say. So it's a much broader feel. And another purpose is, I put this one in, people will probably recognize this guy's car at least, that Elon Musk and Tesla, he decided to put his original car into space. That Tesla came along as an organization which thought they could design electric cars better than the rest, and that's when they first put it into play. But their motto and their purpose in life is around accelerating the use of sustainable energy. So it's not about just designing electric cars for the sake of it. It's about making sure the world has sufficient sustainable energy resources going forward so that we can pass on the world to our kids and grandchildren. And that greater purpose is something which resonates hugely with some people and not with others. So it has its brand advocates, but it also has he has lots of knockers, and you know the way in which he goes about his life is sometimes questionable. But it gives you a purpose that sits behind a brand. Now the next The next ingredient is values. And values are often mentioned. Lots of organizations say they're values led. Values are the things that you really believe in, things that you put before profit, things that summarize the way you believe in the way the world should be. And it's useful to define what your values are. It's not something you can make up because they're beliefs at the end of the day. You can't pretend to have integrity if you don't. So you need to be as honest can be with this. And you also need to think about your values as a business owner, perhaps, but also the values of the rest of your team and how the brand can share a set of values that you could then recruit against. So you end up recruiting people who have shared values, and you recruit customers as well who have shared values. There's a quote here from Harvard Business Review around the percentage of consumers who say they're more likely to buy from a brand with shared values as themselves. It's similar to the question of purpose. Consumers are becoming increasingly aware of these greater things that way beyond the sale of a standard product. And this is where good branding means good business. And you can start to imagine how the two go side by side. Pret, hugely successful food chain, they believe in fresh food and a lack of waste. So they make all of their sandwiches in the restaurant that you go to on the day that you go to it, and none will be served the next day. That they don't believe in waste, so any stock which is left at the end of the day will be given to the homeless in the area, and it will enable them to continue their business. Now, the people who know that really buy into that, so they buy not just a sandwich at lunchtime, they buy into that ideal of this is going to be fresh and they're not going to waste anything, and their values and beliefs come through the way they do business. Innocent is another often used example. They've got a fantastic tone of voice. So you'll see at the bottom of this carton, stop looking at my bottom. It's a light-hearted use of fun language in order to portray yourselves in a certain way. Now they believe, excuse me, they believe in the opportunity to communicate with them. You'll see you can phone them on the banana phone, or you can go and visit them at fruit towers. They believe everybody is part of the same family, and their beliefs will come through in everything they do, that their products will reflect that, and the way they do business reflects that as well. And I thought I'd include this as well. A few of you might have seen this as well. It's been shared on LinkedIn sort of periodically over the last few years. And when you talk about beliefs, this was a set of beliefs and values, or a manifesto, which Nike had at the very start of their business. And it's interesting. You'll get copies of this presentation afterwards, so you don't have to scribble all of this down. But when you read this, it's really clear what the founders of the organization believed in. Now, whether they lived those values 100% of the time is not always clear, but it gives you a good idea of the way that they approach life. Always very interesting. I don't think it's now as valid for the business as it was then. I'm sure they've moved on to different areas as they've grown enormously, but this is a good indication of values. And the final ingredient I'm going to talk about is around personality traits. Now, brands can be like people, so each one has its own personality, and it's important with personality that you have a degree of consistency, because you can imagine if you went down to the pub and you met a friend, and one week they were really miserable, and the next week they were really happy, and the next week they were really very serious and learned. You could walk away from those 3 meetings and think, well, I just don't know where I stand with that person. I don't necessarily trust them because they're different every time I meet them. And it's just the same for brands. It's important to have a consistency of personality through all of the applications and the use of your brand. These two guys, I don't know if you know them, well, it's a clue on the t-shirt there. This is Ben and Jerry, who set up a rather fantastic ice cream brand about 20 years ago. And when you ask them what their personality is, they're hippies. They absolutely are. They're generous. They go about their life in a certain way, and they wanted to reflect that in their ice cream. And you can see it. You can see it in the names of the flavors, from Cherry Garcia. You know, you can see it in the way that their packaging is is very accessible and friendly and soft, and the way that the organisation's run. So their personality as individuals comes into the team brand personality. And the final example is Brewdog, which most of you will know, I'm sure, as a recent beer brand. Now, as a brand, they've always had a sort of an attitude which is quite sort of anti-establishment, you know, from punk IPA names through to lots of other activities that they do. They've always been seen to be the sort of renegades and the challengers. And they've recently gone through a rebrand, and they've sat down and thought about it and thought, people think of us as this sort of crazy renegade brand that does these strange things and gimmicky things. But in fact, as a brand and a group of people, we're quite a bit deeper than people might think, and we want to give an opinion on things that happen in life, and we want to improve things. And so they've gone through a rebrand to be a bit less anti-establishment whilst retaining those beliefs. And they started to talk about things which they wouldn't have talked about before, but things that they're interested in. So in this particular case, they talk about sustainability and about the planet. And I think this is a good example, and Rachel will go on to talk about this a little bit more, around situations where brands can evolve, that what the theory and the strategy behind your brand won't always stay the same. It will change as circumstances change, as you grow, as the world change, as your customers get older and change their issues and opinions in life. You will need to evolve with that as well. And this is a good example of somebody who is identifying that and starting to do it. Now, they'll probably lose some customers because they liked all of that attitude, but they'll gain new ones as well. So that the brand and the ingredients that sit with it evolve quite regularly. Okay, so that's a fairly quick gallop through a number of brand ingredients. I'm now going to pass over to Rachel, who's going to talk about a couple of specific stories of brands that we've evolved, and these are both SMEs. They're both based in our region, and we thought they'd give you lots of interesting examples of that theory in action.
Thanks, Nick. You mind steering? Great. Okay, so as Nick said, I'm going to talk about two specific examples. He mentioned before in his theory about really you've got your strategy side of things, but then you've got the bit that most people consider to be branding, which is when the strategy and the creative come to life. These two examples do that in quite different ways. So first off, I'm just talking about Harrogate Springwater. Here's what they used to look like. And now the reason I want to talk about Harrogate is because they are a very interesting example. Well, it's an example of a sector which is all about brand, because I would defy any of you here to tell me or to pick out of a lineup the contents of that Harrogate bottle next to a Volvic bottle. Now, I wouldn't say that to James, the owner of Harrogate, but unless you've done a water sommelier course, it's not about the water. It is about the brand. In a position when you have, when you're in a position where you have a choice of brands, you're not in just WH Smith's when they've just got Volvic, for example. How else do you choose? It's all about the brand. So what we wanted with Harrogate Springwater is we needed to give other people a reason to choose us beyond the contents, and that's why they came to us. They came to us to talk about the brand. Just one other thing on that bottle is they also wanted to retain all the equity that built up in that brand over the past sort of 7 years before they came and spoke with us. And there was equity, particularly in the name Harrogate, because that's what people thought of when they thought of this brand, not surprisingly. And secondly, in that black label, because in a sea, no pun intended, of blue and green waters that are all to do with rolling hills and health and vitality, Harrogate, with its sort of stoically black choice, chosen for cost reasons by the very pragmatic owner, actually stuck out a mile in a really good way. So what we needed to do was to find a central thought that would allow us to create a brand that would actually ring true and would resonate with people. Now, what you could do is you could make something up. And I bet there are people out there who probably do that all the time. We don't find it very effective, and you could say it's a little bit disingenuous. But what we find to be more successful is if your big idea is centered around something that is really, really true to you and that is based on some kind of fact. So we did loads of research when it came to Harrogate. We spoke with Malcolm, the local historian. We even read a book or two. We went to Harrogate's foremost historical monuments, plural, I think there were a couple, and we discovered a lot about the history of drawing the waters of Harrogate. One of which, and what turned out to be the most significant, is that Harrogate was actually the original British spa town. That is to say, it was the first place in the UK to bottle spring water. And in fact, people would travel for hundreds of miles to take the life-giving waters of Harrogate, which smelled terrible, by the way, of sulphur, absolutely horrible stuff. But apparently was supposed to be, you know, cures for all sorts of things. That was back in 1571. So this turned out to be something that was really, really true, really differentiated. No one else in the water sector were talking about this at all. But also something that really mattered to the owners of Harrogate. They really saw themselves as holding this baton, or passing on the baton of drawing the waters of Harrogate. They're the people who do it now. They're the custodians of that process, but they won't be the only ones forever. They're just the ones who are doing it right now. So that was a central truth that really resonated, and we knew had some kind of some sort of standout in the market. What it also allowed us to do, and one of the magic things about having a big idea, is that it also allows you to make decisions during the creative process. So for example, here's the Harrogate Springwater logo, and it told us that if our big idea is that we are the original, in fact it was the original and still the best, then we should behave like a British classic. So we should have we should hint at some of the brand behaviour of a British classic. Think of Barbour and think of Chanel, not British, but stick with me. But think of those classic brands. They have that very simple type. It's tracked out, so nicely spaced out. It's modernist. Look at those spiky A's on there and things. We could borrow some of that behaviour to tell people that we are a classic, and it helped us with that. And similarly, on the next slide, you'll see also that it told us that we could steal some of the heritage or nod to the heritage because we didn't want to steal. We could, for example, create these patterns that are in the background of these labels here. And they're inspired by the patterns of the Turkish baths in Harrogate, which is one of the sort of biggest attractions there. So we could bring in these little nods, and it was all led by that central idea. But that would only get us so far. That's why Nick went through the other ingredients, of course, at the start. So you don't just need a big idea, you need more than that. Now, this is the page that actually I've nicked from a real presentation that we shared with Harrogate. This is all to do with their values. We didn't really create a clear, well, we didn't tackle personality with them, because what we found with Harrogate was that the big idea plus values was enough. What we needed to do was to define what originality meant to us. So it wouldn't just be held by the owner of Harrogate, who one day wants to get away. It needed to be something that could be held by the whole business. So we developed values, and they are based on things that are already true about Harrogate, but that might need turning up in different degrees. And as Nick said, it's about making sure that these are really and definitely true to you. So what we didn't do is foist them on anybody. We made sure that they were created with them in mind. And like I say, we just then have to turn them up to different degrees. So we'd established what our kind of original was as well. It wasn't say Elon Musk original, as we've spoken about already. It was our kind of original, and we determined what that might be. So if you just flick on Nick, that allowed us then to create some brand assets. This is some photography we did a few years ago, some brand assets with that kind of personality in mind. It told us that we had a right, if we were all about originality, to comment on people who are originators, who are innovators. It told us we could start a blog that was full of original content that would help you to develop your own point of view on the world. It told us that we could have a point of view on fashion. It even told the owners that they could sponsor a horse at Ascot. That was, I didn't see it coming, but they did it, and they loved it. So, you know, props to them. What it also meant, though, is, and I think the most useful thing about it, it was very successful, the rebrand. We probably wouldn't have included it had it not been successful, I won't lie. But sales increased by 44% in 2 years. Sales volume increased by 42% against market increase of 17%. So even against the market, it was a staggering increase. And that one of their main objectives was to secure the sale of the business, and that concluded last month, I think it was, Nick, wasn't it, to Danone? So yeah, so that they're doing, they're flying. I'm very happy, and that was James's happy face even before they sold to Danone. So he's quite content now. But what I've included his picture for, that's him on his new line, which they built. In fact, they built another 2 lines to accommodate the demand after sales increased. But what he said was most useful about having a big idea is that it allowed him to say no to people, which sounds terribly negative, but let me explain. Before they rebranded, people would say to him, James, why don't you go and give 20 bottles to that primary school down there? Or have you ever thought about sponsoring Great British Bake Off, such and such? And his answer was, oh, maybe. I suppose we could. But actually, once they'd decided what they were about and they had a single meaningful and differentiated proposition, he could say very politely, no, we don't do that, we do this, and our efforts are now focused on this. And he says that is the single most useful and most valuable thing that came out of the rebrand process. So that's Harrogate Spring Water. On a different note, including some of the different ingredients and different brand elements, is Keelan Farm Shop. Now, I probably need to explain a little bit more about what Keelan Farm Shop is, or you're going to think it's some kind of little posho shop on a hill. Imagine, instead of a farm shop, imagine more of a farm supermarket. It is on a hill, actually, the original one between Bradford and Halifax. And it is, yeah, like a farm shop on crack, basically. Can I say that? Maybe, on steroids. So it's, when we started working with them, it had a turnover of 9 million. When they had 2 shops, and I'll come back to that, turnover increased to 24 million per year. So pretty big business. They were set up in 1916 by Harry Robertshaw, who was a butcher, and then the business was passed to his kids, and then to their kids beneath, who now run it, James and Victoria. So we were brought in because they knew that they could take it from this brilliant business, admittedly, but to something much bigger. And they had real aspirations to grow into a bigger geographical footprint, to also take it online. So what we worked on is originally just on a rebrand, on a classic rebrand. It involved a renaming process, which is much more fun than all the rest of it and takes much longer. But if you just click on Nick, we created a brand, and over the next couple of pages you'll see a few bits and pieces that we did. So a set of guidelines, we created them some logos. It's all very flexible. They had their own typeface. I've got to say, when we created this, it's probably about 9 years ago, and this looked super differentiated back then. Others have since jumped on the bandwagon, but this really gave them huge market standout. It led to an increase in footfall, through increased marketing as well, and just things like this. This is a bit of one of my favourite before and afters. Again, excuse my phone shots, but the old jars there on the left, and then we also rebranded some of the packaging and things like that, and we made it much better, and it was loads better. It was really successful. Things grew. However, they had bigger ambitions than just taking one shop and making it bigger and better. But that's what we did. We started to set some of those rules and some of those templates. You'll see here we also designed the shop. We designed even everything from the tiles to what should go on the walls to how we lay things out. But like I say, to get bigger and better, they had to systemize. Going from one shop on a hill in a cowshed to a multi-shop footprint means things like rationalizing your supply chain, working out how do you produce. They made 70% or 70 to 80% of their own food themselves on site. How do they then work that out physically? How do your EPOS, your electronic point of sale systems work? How do you transport? How do you train different teams? How do you recruit when Victoria, the owner's on one site and not on the other? It had to grow in a really different way. So that meant we had to start getting a bit more structured and streamlined with how we did things. One of the ways in which we did that is by articulating the big idea that was underneath everything that happened. Now, Nick talks about living that purpose and that being a real challenge. It's not just about defining your purpose, it's about living it. Keelam are the absolute perfect example of this. If you've ever been there, I'm sure you will love it, because you can't help but sense that what is so great about Keelam is that they genuinely mean that food shopping should be an adventure, not a chore. It's about making the food experience exciting and accessible for everybody, so it's affordable as well. You don't have to be a rich person. You can be a family and still enjoy really great, well-made, home-cooked Yorkshire food. So we defined their big idea. We also then defined their values, and we called them the family values. And we didn't just, I don't know if anyone's listening who has the words integrity, people, or maybe human, innovation, I don't know, something else classic in your values. They're the classic values. For us, that wouldn't have been much good. We're talking values here with Keelam that need to apply to the people who buy the bacon or make the bacon, as well as the people who push the trolleys into the car park. These values had to really speak to everybody. So we spelt them out. We only sell food that tastes great is much better than great tasting. We make things better is much better than we do the right thing. We are for everyone is etc. These meant something, and we made sure they did, and we use real language. And it's a really little trick, but it's something I'm doing more and more actually when I work with clients, because it really helps people to get them and to remember their values. And these are the things that if they weren't true, they wouldn't want to work there anymore, and they felt like they resonated with everybody. Also with Keelam, it's the personality show. We had to define what our personality is. And again, we did that in sort of long form, sort of way. We know our food, we get things done, we make people smile, and that's really key. We are straightforward and make a difference. Because otherwise, the client just said, well, it has to be Keelamy. It just has to be Keelamy. And I know what Keelamy means because I've worked with them for 10 years. But for their new head of marketing or whatever, the new owners, whatever it might be, there had to be a way of transposing that essence that's all in Victoria's head and getting it out there so that Keelamy became these 5 things. And from there, then it's just in the doing. Just in the doing. So we created a system that would allow us to create signs for shops going forwards. We started them for the different departments in Skipton. We also then looked at other touch points as well for the packaging that's bringing that personality that we make people smile, we get things done, and bringing that to life. It meant that we didn't have to be boring, actually. We could have a juice range which really spelt out what was in it, but was also called really tea-rific when it's got matcha tea in it, because we'd given ourselves permission. And we just kept pushing it, because what we realized is what the worst thing is, what's the worst that could happen. We were careful always not to ever infringe anything or to do anything that was too naughty. But really what we could do when we're still this small is to be nimble and to evolve. We also created some other little moments throughout the shop, because if food shopping is an adventure, not a chore, you can't just say that. Back to living that purpose, you can't just say it's an adventure. You have to make it an adventure. So what do you need in an adventure? Well, you need an element, dictionary definition here, you need a bit of peril. That's probably a bit much for a farm shop in Skipton. So what we wanted is we wanted little adventures, little moments behind corners. So we changed the layouts. We worked with the interior architects to change the layout so the shops didn't follow that same up, down pattern. You had things in your way that had things that you could taste on them. The trolleys had little jokes on them that featured animals. They're quite frankly weird jokes, and I still don't remember what some of them mean, but that's okay because we could get away with it, and if not, we could print some new ones. We put little supplier stories in. We shoved them in IKEA frames back to IKEA the night before it opened, and we popped them on the shelves to tell people that, I forget what her name is, but the lady that makes that chili jam just down the road for Keelan, to tell that story, because what we're doing is showing you that is local food that's easy to get, and it's great tasting, and you should love it. There's also a tractor in there. That was not our idea. It's a brilliant idea though. That thing underneath is a fire escape, and the client just decided to put a tractor on it, and it's completely amazing. So the brilliant ideas came out of this, the thing that we didn't make up. All we did was write it down and make it sound a little bit nicer. Food shopping should be an adventure, not a chore. The rest is just bringing it to life. The biggest thing about this though, this happened to be turned out to be one of the biggest physical projects we ever worked on. 25,000 square foot space in Skipton, which includes specking the colours in the louvres through to what that sign is there and those lights. So it's a big old beast, but by having that brand essence sorted, it allowed us to make the decisions much more easily. And it also provided us with a template that we can then roll forwards. Victoria last month, I think 3 weeks ago now, has just completed on the sale of the business. She's remaining as creative director, but she has successfully managed to pass this baton on to other people, so she can get a few hours of sleep actually, because working in retail, I'm sure you know, is pretty hectic. But for us, the biggest lesson on this one is that we never ever stopped changing. Those guidelines that I showed you at the start, I don't think I've looked at those for about 6 years, because they would be irrelevant now, because we are changing and we are learning. It would be foolhardy at best to assume that you do your rebrand or you create your brand and then you never look at it again. It's wise to consider that the market is moving, and right now, this year, the market is changing more than we've seen since 2008, given Corona, which we don't speak of. So you've got to keep changing. You've got to keep assessing and making sure that your brand is right for market. And I think that's what Keelan has really shown me, is that you can do that. You don't need to be so wedded to it.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. That's fantastic. Two really good stories of how to bring that theory to life. And I think just to summarize from me, it's all of the ingredients I went through to begin with. They're all important parts, but it's not a blueprint that you have to follow religiously. I think it's important that you do what's appropriate for you and your business or your brand or wherever you sit in the process. Think about what's important to you, and it might just be an attitude, which is the key thing. It might be personality. It might be a purpose. Whatever's most important to you and your brand and your customers, that's the thing that you should focus on, and use the strategy to help support a creative brief that you can give to creative team that gives them lots and lots of answers to questions, but leaves enough space to explore and open up the equation. So that's the end of our talk. So it's probably gone on a bit longer than planned, but I've tried to keep an eye on some questions. I've not yet seen any examples of purpose being sent in, so I'm sure you're all scribbling away and working on that, but it's not an easy thing, to be honest, and if that's one thing that you've found, that's a good thing. I've got a question here. This is from Tom, and Tom's asking what are our views on the brand Corona update emails from brands and CEOs. Do they provide real value to audiences and customers? I'll maybe make a start, and then Rachel can come in on that. I think there's a certain amount of generic information going out, first of all. I think in our experience, clients and brands know they need to do something, but initially they were not quite sure what to do. So they tended to reiterate the things which the government were circulating around business assistance and help, or around health and washing hands and social distancing. I think I've not seen that many very good examples where a brand has thought, well, what does this really mean for our customers, and how can we provide the sort of information that they would find really useful at this time? And I think that's what you'll start to see now. Certainly we're working with a couple of customers, and Nexus is one of those, to develop some content which is a bit more relevant to their members and their stakeholders in a way that they will find genuinely useful. So I think that will evolve during the next few days. But so far it's been a bit repetitive and a bit regurgitative, should I say. Rachel, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to separate the message from the way that they're doing it, because I'm thinking about the examples that really resonated with me, and Asda, and I didn't think I'd say this, I'm not a huge Asda shopper or anything, but Asda have done an amazing job of getting the tone of their emails right, but also they're doing a really good job of looking after their staff during this time, which makes me feel much warmer about them, because basically they're doing good things and they're telling me about it. Asana, on the other hand, is a brand I'm a big fan of. I don't know if you know Asana, it's a bit like Basecamp, but it's generally really good. However, their content has very much been about selling you Asana during a time when genuinely I might need to use Asana, but I'm a bit put off by the monthly subscription, but they're basically selling me ways and means of using Asana during what's a difficult time, so it comes across as more of profiteering. So really it's about tone, isn't it? I think it's just about tone. Our personal view with many clients has been, if you don't need to say anything, if you don't have anything meaningful to add, then don't. But as Nick said, then if you can, just as Nexus you do, of course, you know, there are ways in which you can add to the discourse around it, then absolutely crack on and use this time. You've got sitting ducks at home, I suppose, but use this time to make sure that your brand purpose and your values are really shining through. There are some I'm sure we'd all rather not hear. I don't need to know what Sports Direct. I quite frankly don't know how Sports Direct got my email address. It's quite useful for that, I suppose, isn't it? But otherwise, it's I don't think a lot of them have stuff that they're actually adding.
Great. Another question was around brand values, and about if you're faced with a difficult decision in business, which your brand tells you you should go one way and your advisors are saying you should do something else because it'll be more profitable, how do you settle that score in your mind? And that's a really interesting thing, because I think lots of brands are often sort of chastised for their behaviors and doing whatever they can to generate more profit for their shareholders. But I think we are starting to see over the last couple of years a genuine change in the situation where values and purpose-led brands are more appealing to their customers, are more successful, and are more interested in backing up the talk with the walk. There's quite a few examples of people who are much better at doing that than used to do that. And what it tells me is that when we get to business decisions in the boardroom and difficult scenarios, more and more brands are putting values first, because they know in the long term that will be beneficial to their business. Branding, I should have said at the beginning, is very much a long-term business. You can't create a brand overnight. It takes a long time to give consumers the evidence that you are who you say you are and behave in the way you behave. And I think you cannot make values up. You can't just pretend that this is something you think people want to hear, because they will find out, and they will find out really very quickly. I think you need to be transparent, as Rachel said. You need to be honest, and you need to work through things. You know, there've been incidents recently like VW and their diesel testing scam, which lots of people were extremely upset about. They bought a specific car because of that reason, that its test results were a certain way, and then it's shown that in fact they'd been faked. But Volkswagen hasn't disappeared from our world. That they still have lots of fans. You know, you buy cars for a reasonably long period of time, and they're working hard to try to resolve that. You know, obviously that'll involve paying compensation as well through the courts. But people have to understand that doing the right thing as much as you possibly can is the thing to do, but it takes time to actually build that reputation. Anything to add, Rach?
No, that's great. Really good.
Good.
Got time for another couple?
Yeah. What about someone's asking here about colour and about how do brands decide what the right colour is for them. You like to answer that one?
Oh yeah. I'm going to think back to a brand that we worked on a couple of years ago, actually, for it's called Mental Health at Work. It's a project by the Royal Foundation and Mind, mental health charity, and that was an interesting case in point, because we were creating for them a program, the name and branding and design of a website that provides mental health resources to people in the workplace. And within that, we were actually being reductive in our design process. It was about looking to see, what does the world of charity and public public sector look like? What colours are in there? Are any colours owned by, for example, cancer owns pink in the charity space. There are those purple. Cancer research also owns purple. You draw out a colour wheel, which is what we did. You can see that actually quite a lot of your colours are taken up. Look, Macmillan takes that lovely green. So actually, you can do that same task within any market. You can see that there are clear owners of certain colours, and then of course you can choose to pit yourself against that. With mental health at work, though, our priority was making it clear that it was a not-for-profit, making it clear that it belonged in that world. So we actually chose to keep it in it's sort of tealy, bluey, greeny sort of space, which kept it sufficiently distanced from Mind, because it's not sponsored by Mind, but it also kept it in that charity space. So that was a conscious decision to decide to be part of that pack. Whereas Harrogate Springwater, you remember that I mentioned before, it was black. And at the time that was released, and at the time that we rebranded it, it was the only black water. Marks and Spencers have since found themselves copying as well. But that was a deliberate decision to put ourselves away, and to actually choose to put black on a bottle of something that is about giving health and things is a big deal. So that's a conscious decision if you're going to do that. So I think choosing your colour has to be part of the strategy. It needs to be part of everything that you do. However, what we always say is, see it in pink, or insert other colour here. You've lost nothing by seeing it in pink, but make sure you see what it looks like. Otherwise, you will always imagine it during the rest of the time with this business. You'll always imagine, what would happen if we'd made it pink? So just whoever you're working with, get them to show you what it looks like in a different colour and a different way of doing things. You might be pleasantly surprised, or at least you'll have put that worry to bed about choosing a particular colour.
Great. And last question is around naming. So how do we make sure that the name for our brand is original and is not something which others are using? Now, I'll answer that one. Naming is a whole subject matter in its own right, which we can talk about for more time than we've got, I'm sure. Finding a new name is an extremely difficult thing. There's different types of names. There are names which are descriptive of what you do, Sports Direct, example. There are names which relate to what you do, Google, which is whatever it is, a millionth of something, which relates to search and the amount of information and data. There are names which are much more descriptive. I noticed someone like Oasis and Warehouse were going into receivership in the press this week, but their name is sort of descriptive of a lovely sort of fashion type phrase. Once you've found your name, and it's part science, part art, you need to make sure that it's not being used by others. So you can do trademark searches. That's available online. It's free of charge to do a very top level search. And you can see whether anybody within your use class, and there are a total, I think, of 24 use classes, which are divided by industry, transport, retail, etc. You can see whether anybody in your use class is using that name. So if somebody is, then they may have registered a trademark against it. And it's important that you don't impinge on anybody else's trademark, but you can go through the process of working out whether it's being used or not. And let me tell you that nearly every single name, apart from those which are made up, will be being used by somebody. So it's a question of seeing how much of an overlap there is between their business and your business. And another aspect is URLs, that it's important to get a good URL for your business, and the more that are taken, the less there are to take. So you've got to have a strategy around URLs, although I suspect in the future that'll become less important with direct links that people click through from one digital media to another. So having a great URL that people type in is less important than it was in previous days. But the whole idea of name, get a good name and you're absolutely flying. But if you get a name which people don't engage with, then you'll struggle with that. As I said, that's maybe the next webinar to talk about naming. Okay, thanks.
Also,
thanks for. Sorry,
just tip on that one as well. We'll always just check the Googleability of things. Check things that other people won't check for you. Check that you're happy that if someone puts this in a hashtag or spells it wrong by one letter, that it's not going to mean, you know, something in French, for example. You've got to do the idiot tests that you think are probably too simple. And using websites like Namecheck, NAMECHK.com allows you to check every social handle going and all different URLs and things like that. So do all the idiot tests as well.
Right, thanks very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys, for that. That was very useful. I'm sure everyone found it very useful as we've got a flood of questions. This session will be recorded, as we said, guys, so you will get a copy of that so you can recap any of this. And if you have any burning questions for the team, we'll also provide an email address for you to email the guys at. Perfect. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, have a good day.
Enjoy the sunshine.